Welcome to the Federal Fiscal Year 2024 VOCA Grant Management Workshop. My name is Lourdes McKenna, the Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA Grant Administrator with the Crime Victims Reparation Commission, CVRC. The CVRC Grants Department also includes Bureau Chief Donna Richmond, VOCA Grant Administrator Kristen Wood-Hagner, State Grant Administrator Marivel Baca, and our grants program specialists, Nathan Furr, Jackie Mascarenas, and Sadie Sires. We are excited to have you join us today to learn more about grant management for the VOCA Award. In this workshop, I will cover the following topics: an overview of CVRC, the Federal Fiscal Year 24 VOCA contracts and special conditions, financial management to include budget revisions and match requirements, grant management requirements such as time and attendance, travel, contracts, and progress reporting, grant fraud, waste, and abuse, and civil rights. In the description for this webinar is a link to a survey. Please complete the survey as a record of your attendance. CVRC requires the financial point of contact, the authorized individual, and the program manager to participate in this workshop. This webinar must be viewed and the survey completed no later than November 30th, 2023. In 1981, the New Mexico legislature created the Crime Victims Reparation Commission as an agency led by a governor-appointed commission with 5 members to assist victims of violent crime. CVRC's mission is to ensure that victims of violent crime don't experience financial hardship because of their victimization, and our compensation department provides reimbursement for eligible expenses related to the crime, such as funeral expenses, medical expenses, and loss of wages. We are the payer of last resort, meaning that we will only pay what is remaining after other sources of payment, such as health insurance, have been exhausted. The CVRC Grants Department also supports victims and their families by administering federal and state funds to support programs like yours throughout the state. We are committed to providing you with the support you need to be successful. We also assist agencies in meeting subgrant requirements such as reporting and invoicing, and we have strong internal control systems in place to demonstrate to the federal government that funds are used appropriately. We offer training, technical assistance, and funding to help subgrantees provide quality services to victims of crime. In fact, you may find any one of our grants department team members assisting because we assign invoices and reporting on a rotating basis. This ensures that no one person is always responsible for the same task, and each item is viewed by multiple people, which federal auditors appreciate as it improves compliance with grant conditions. Today, we're specifically talking about the federal funding that CVRC receives from the Office for Victims of Crime Victim Assistance Funding, known as VOCA. The Victims of Crime Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan on October 12, 1984, establishing the Crime Victims Fund, which provides funds to states for victim assistance and compensation programs that offer support and services to those affected by violent crimes. Funds are deposited annually into the Crime Victim Fund from criminal fines, penalties, forfeited bail bonds, and special assessments collected by the federal government. Crime Victim Fund dollars do not come from taxpayers. They come from people or corporations convicted of federal crimes. In July 2021, President Biden signed the VOCA Fix bill to sustain the Crime Victim Fund. Among other provisions, this law requires funds collected by the federal government under deferred and non-prosecution agreements to be deposited into the Crime Victim Fund. It also clarifies that states may waive a requirement that victim compensation programs promote victim cooperation with law enforcement, which New Mexico was already doing, and provides the Attorney General with the authority to provide no-cost extensions to all VOCA award subrecipients. Most importantly, this VOCA fix is intended to allow the Office for Victims of Crime to continue funding essential and life-saving services to crime victims, which are provided by victim service providers nationwide. In July, CVRC issued a request for proposals for continuation applications for VOCA funds in compliance with the state of New Mexico's procurement regulations. A request for proposal was issued in August for competitive applications for eligible agencies not receiving continuation funding. Recommendations for continuation funding were presented to the Commission on August 24th, 2023. CVRC notified awardees and provided a preliminary award letter by email. Upon completion of review negotiations, a final award letter was sent via email, and then contracts were sent on October 2nd, 2023. Competitive funding preliminary and final award letters were also sent out in accordance with the request for proposal sequence of events. Subgrantees should maintain both the preliminary and final award letters on file for CVRC site visits and federal audits. The preliminary award letter includes the awarded amount to the agency for the second year of continuation funding. Between the preliminary award and final award letter, CVRC worked with subgrantees in meeting special conditions for the application to ensure that the funded projects meet the award's intent, especially with budgets and primary project components. CVRC wants to ensure that the goals and objectives in the primary project components reflect what the budgeted funds can support and meaningfully provide direct services to victims of crime in our state. Final award letters were also sent out. CVRC awards VOCA subgrants on a 4-year funding cycle that are contingent on maintaining good standing and submission of an annual application. The specific level for future funding cycles from the Office for Victims of Crime remains uncertain. Future VOCA appropriations will determine future year allocations. We anticipate the funding levels for federal fiscal years 25 and federal fiscal year 26 to be reduced. However, less than the anticipated level of 50%. The level of federal funding New Mexico receives determines awards to subrecipients. The final award letter included instructions for signing and submitting your subcontract grant and financial compliance measures for the agency. As part of the RFP process, CVRC reviewed all applicants' most recent audit reports in their entirety. Agencies with audit reports that had material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that put them at risk were provided with additional monitoring and technical assistance to ensure that we are responsible and accountable for the funding. That we are also demonstrating fiscal prudence to the federal government and auditors, and that we are helping these agencies develop the organizational capacity to stabilize. If there are additional monitoring requirements in your award letter, please make sure that the individuals responsible for meeting those requirements are aware of them. Invoices must be submitted with all required supporting documentation. We cannot process and reimburse for an invoice that is lacking required documentation. We will discuss invoices in more details later in this presentation. CVRC conducts in-person site visits with our subrecipients. If a site visit is requested, we will send the agency a pre-site visit questionnaire to be completed prior to the visit. Next, we will review your contract and highlight key special conditions. It is important that the agency read and understand all special conditions, as you will be expected to develop policies within your agency to adhere to these conditions. If you have not yet signed your contract, please do so and upload it into WebGrants. If you get an error when trying to upload the contract, it may be that the file name is too long. Try renaming the file with a shorter name. Please do not hesitate to ask us for assistance. Reimbursement or payment against invoices cannot be processed until a signed contract has been uploaded into WebGrants, and the first invoice is due November 10th. On the first page of the contract, you will find the federal award program, the federal award number, the amount of your award, and your award period, which for federal fiscal year 24 continuation awards begins October 1st, 2023, and ends September 30th, 2024. The contract also reminds you that payment is by reimbursement only. Competitive awards have a start date of November 1st, 2023. Please review all conditions listed in your contract. It is important to remain compliant because these conditions are required by the Code of Federal Regulations, the Victims of Crime Act, the Office for Victims of Crime, the conditions of the federal award, and state laws. When CVRC or federal auditors review programs, they are looking for compliance with these conditions. Now we want to highlight some of these special conditions. This contract can be terminated by the parties just like any other contract. The agency is to maintain all records, and CVRC, DOJ, and OVC have the right to inspect those records at any time. Any amendments must be submitted through WebGrants for approval, and the agency must comply with equal opportunity employment laws. The primary project components in the proposal are what guide the scope of work for this award. All funded staff should be aware of those PPCs. Prior to the final selection of personnel to be hired with grant funds, the subrecipient agrees to provide CVRC with the names and resumes of the candidates recommended for hiring. Please contact the grant administrator if you have any questions about that. All direct staff must attend at least one CVRC training on victim compensation. The dates for this victim compensation training can be found on the CVRC website, again with the dates and links for that training available. The agency agrees to inform all potentially eligible victims and to assist them in filing for victim compensation and assist in the submission of their compensation application. The agency also agrees to notify and assist victims with VINE, the automated victim notification system. If you would like more information on VINE, please reach out to our office. The agency must post the grievance policies where they are easily seen. The posting must include the name and contact information for CVRC as an agency funder. Also, the agency must let us know if another federal agency deems you to be high risk. At that point, CVRC may add additional requirements to the funding. Compliance with all applicable sections of 34 U.S. Code 12291B, including Section 13, which prohibits discrimination. We will talk more about this in detail. Also, the agency agrees to comply with the DOJ Financial Guide and Part 200 uniform requirements. This includes reporting potentially duplicate funding to CVRC. All out-of-state travel must be approved by CVRC ahead of time, and there must be no commingling of funds. This means the agency must have a good accounting system in place to track all revenue and expenditures. Additional contract conditions include that an agency may not supplant federal funds. This means you cannot redirect or reduce state or local funds that are being received because VOCA grant may cover those expenses. This is what is called supplanting. Payment is by reimbursement only. CVRC will reimburse for expenses from the prior month. Invoices for expenditures are due to our office by the 10th of the month, or if our office is closed on the 10th of the month, such as it's a holiday or a weekend, then we request those be submitted the business day before. Because of state requirements and the end of the state fiscal year, June invoices may be due a little earlier, so be sure to read all communications sent regarding the VOCA award. There are federal requirements related to the allowability of consultant rates. Be sure that you are aware of what those consultant rate caps are. VOCA funds cannot support the purchase of food for meetings, conferences, or trainings. We do have some programs that we support food for victims related to shelter programs, but we cannot support food or beverages for meetings, conferences, or any staff trainings. Also, please promptly refer not only to the Department of Justice, but our office as well, if there are any credible evidence or actual perceived fraud, waste, abuse, or misconduct, or if you suspect a program may be potentially discriminating against clients or is not able to provide assistance to clients. We want you to share these concerns with our office so that we may look into them, provide technical assistance as needed, or prevent further harm. If an agency is not in compliance with either CVRC or federal government regulations, they may be deemed high risk, and then additional conditions may be placed on the award. There are many provisions regarding civil rights and discrimination against employees and the people that you're serving. We will go into those in more detail in a bit, but just briefly, applicants were required to account for access needs and provide policies for limited English proficiency and deaf and hard of hearing participants. Another thing to be aware of is compromising victim safety and recovery. And again, inaccessibility may be considered compromising victim safety. This is something that CVRC monitors. And finally, some additional contract highlights. The subrecipient agrees to utilize volunteers within the organization to support the agency's services and mission. Also, the subrecipient must make determinations of suitability before individuals may interact with participating minors. This requirement applies regardless of an individual's employment status. Subrecipients must complete the following required searches for individuals: a name-based search of the required public sex offender and child abuse registries, such as the Drew Sojourn National Sex Offender public website, and a fingerprint-based criminal history search of the required criminal history registries or similar repositories covering at least the last 5 calendar years from the date of the search. If a fingerprint-based search is legally unavailable, a name-based search using current and previous names and aliases is required. All searches must cover jurisdictions in which that individual has lived, worked, or attended school during the past 5 years. An individual does not meet suitability if they withhold consent to a required criminal history search, knowingly make a false statement that affects or is intended to affect any required search, is listed as a registered sex offender on the Drew Sojourn National Sex Offender Public website, or to the knowledge of the subrecipient has been convicted, whether as a felony or misdemeanor, under federal, state, tribal, or local laws of any of the following crimes: sexual or physical abuse, neglect, or endangerment of an individual under the age of 18 at the time of the offense, rape, sexual assault, including conspiracy to commit rape or sexual assault, sexual exploitation, such as through child pornography or sex trafficking, kidnapping, or voyeurism. Any publications and materials paid for with these VOCA funds must include the following language. This project was supported by grant number XXX, found on the front of your contract, awarded by NMCVRC, OVC, and U.S. Department of Justice. These opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this publication, program, exhibition are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Justice. If you have any questions about these conditions, please reach out to our office. Quarterly reporting is submitted through the Office for Justice of Programs website. This program measurement tool, or PMT, is due the 15th of the month following the end of the quarter. For example, the first PMT report will be due January 15th for October through December. CVRC will send out email reminders when it's time to submit. Please note that the OJP system does not open for agencies to enter data until the quarter has ended. So for the report due January 15th, that portal will be available beginning January 1st. Agencies must include with their data a case history or success story in which VOCA funds were used to assist crime victims for each quarter. The quarter 4 report will include questions requesting cumulative information. The questions are subject to change per the Office of Justice Programs. So now we will take a look at that PMT system. As we log into the PMT system, you will select this yellow OVC PMT button. In this platform, you will complete the quarterly PMT reports, but at the beginning of your grant, you will also complete the SAR, or Sub-Award Recipient Report. As you click on this SAR button, this should take you to your SAR report. I will go to the list and we will look at the 12th District Attorney's Office since they're first on my list. You will see the 2024 Victim Assistance SAR report ready for you to enter your data. Click on the link that says Enter Edit Data. Part 1 of this report, if you are not seeing it, you may click on this plus minus button to toggle between it, expand Part 1, and review the data. As a subrecipient, you will not have access to edit this data, but please review and ensure that all of the information entered is correct. You will then select the plus minus toggle to complete Part 2. For Part 2, you will enter the service areas or the counties that the agency serves. All agencies will select this match waiver checkbox as match is being waived, and we will talk more about that. Select the services the agency expects to provide this quarter. That's question 9A through E. Everybody must check the checkbox in F to assist potential recipients in seeking compensation benefits. We talked about that as we were reviewing the contract highlights. Question 16, again, check mark all of those victimizations the agency expects to serve. And question 11 is budget and staffing. So the agency will enter the total budget for all victimizations for this award year. The VOCA amount will automatically populate, and then the agency should list the other funding sources. The totals of B1 through B5 must equal the amount entered up here in question A. Question C through F talk about personnel. Again, enter the number of paid staff, the number of VOCA funded hours, the number of volunteers, and the number of volunteer hours. All agencies must utilize volunteers for this award year. So these values must be entered. When that report is complete, you will save and continue. CVRC staff will then review this SAR report and either approve it or contact the agency if there's questions or clarifications that we need. The quarterly reporting is entered through this Enter Data button. And again, the report is due the first day after the quarter ends. So the agency will select the reporting period. We will look at the last quarter that we just completed, July 1st through September 30th. And again, you will not have to select an agency. It should go directly to your report, but we will select the 12th Judicial District. And for this quarterly report, you will enter the total number of individuals who received services during that quarter. If you had any anonymous contacts, for example, if the agency has a hotline, you may have values entered here, and the number of individuals that were new receiving services from the agency for the first time during this reporting period. For the first quarter, October 1st through December 31st, all victims that are served will be considered new, as this is the first quarter of a new project period. As you can see in this report, you can hover over items and a pop-up of instructions will be available to provide you additional information. Complete the demographics for all of your new individuals. So again, for the first quarter, that will be everybody the agency serves. The types of victimizations for all victims that were served, and then any special classification of individuals. The second tab is the direct services. The first question is the number of individuals the agency assisted with completing a victim compensation application. Remember, this is one of the contract conditions. Question 7, select the types of services that were provided. As an agency checkmarks these, it will then expand those categories in Section 8. Section 8 through E is really asking two questions. The first line is how many individuals received services in this category. And then the second question is, what were those specific services that were provided? So it's asking how many people and what services. So you will input those numbers. And then again, in this additional comments box is where you will include your case study or success story for each quarter. Once you have entered all the information, you will hit the Save and Continue button. It will take you to this review page. You can either leave this open or choose to submit the report. Again, CVRC will review the data and get back to the agency if there are questions or clarifications before we approve the report. Again, in quarter 4, there will be additional questions. These questions are subject to change as they are created by the Office for Justice Programs. But in federal fiscal year 23, the questions asked about surveys that were provided to clients and received back, some of the challenges that the agency faced, and services that could not be met. These will be cumulative questions. Again, emails will be sent out as the PMT reports are due. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. So now we want to talk about grant fraud, waste, and abuse. So you have been awarded funds specifically to implement the project using the budget to meet objectives and goals in your proposal. If your activities are within these boundaries and not subject to one of the conditions that we talked about in the contract, then you can take those actions without requesting additional permission. However, if you deviate from that, that is considered grant fraud. Fraud isn't always intentional. It can be accidental, a slippery slope of misuse and mismanagement of funds, or even well-intended. Even in these instances, there can be fiscal and even criminal consequences. So we want to help you mitigate those risks. One of those is conflict of interest. An example in conflict of interest is in the procurement process. As a subrecipient receiving federal funds, you are expected to make decisions free of undisclosed personal or organizational conflicts of interest, both in appearance and in fact. Perception matters. Purchasing goods or services or hiring an individual from a relevant party or a business associate without properly procuring, so not following your agency's hiring policies and procedures, and securing a trainer without soliciting for that trainer because you think that person is just going to be the best trainer because you've known her for 20 years, but you didn't properly issue a request for a trainer or properly send out a proposal, would be considered a conflict of interest. In doing so, you selected a business associate for that position, but failed to potentially see that there might be somebody who's equally qualified to provide training and who might have been a better candidate. Vendor selections must be fair and transparent. Consultants can also play an important part of that role, but they have to have a fair selection process also. They must have reasonable rates and have specific verifiable work product. Another type of fraud would be lying or failing to report. Lying or failing to report is unilaterally redirecting the use of funds. For example, you were getting money to do project A, and now you just decide to change your programming to do project B, which is unrelated. Instead of requesting prior permission to do so, a unilateral decision was made. You may be able to fix this error. However, redirecting funds may make the expenses ineligible under that pool of money. Another type of grant fraud is failing to adequately account for transactions. Agencies must be able to adequately account for transactions and represent the eligibility of funding. It is important to keep good records of documentation related to transactions and expenditures. If there are questions about allowable costs, please check with the grant administrator. As we talk about fraud prevention strategies, it is important that you examine your programs and your policies and procedures to identify fraud vulnerabilities. CVRC is available to review policies and procedures upon request. During a site visit, we will look at policies, and we at that time can identify vulnerabilities and make recommendations based on other programs that we've worked with to help create fraud prevention strategies and establish well-designed and tested systems of internal controls. For example, not having just one person who opens the mail, reconciles the accounting system, deposits the checks, and writes all the checks for the agency. That's a lot of power for one position. It is incredibly dangerous because it becomes difficult to identify conflicts of interest, to disclose them, to ensure that there's a fair and transparent, fully documented procurement process in place for the agency. With regards to the VOCA award, you can go to the U.S. Department of Justice guidelines and the federal OVC definitions to get more information on fraud prevention. As we move on to the match requirements, match funding for federal fiscal year 24 is waived. The Office for Victims of Crime issued match waivers during the national emergency pandemic. The mandate stated that beginning on the date of the national emergency, with respect to the pandemic, a match waiver would be established. That match waiver would end on the date 1 year after the date of the end of the national emergency. The national emergency with respect to the pandemic began on March 1st, 2020, and ended on May 11th, 2023. Therefore, 1 year from the end date would waive the match funding requirement to May 11th, 2024. However, it has been determined that match funding will be waived for the entire federal fiscal year 24 VOCA continuation award period through September 30th, 2024. Match will be required in federal fiscal year 25. Now we will talk about invoices and budget revisions. Invoices are to be submitted through the grant management system web grants. The invoice dates should be the first of the month to the last day of the month. For example, the first invoice will be dated October 1st through October 31st. The next invoice will be dated November 1st through November 30th. Remember, your first invoice for October is due November 10th, and invoices are submitted monthly or quarterly, depending on the agency's special conditions. The invoice should be submitted with an accounting sheet and all supporting documentation required. If an invoice is submitted late, the agency may need to wait for reimbursement until the following month's batch is run. Other tips for invoices include checking that the dates on the invoice are correct. Again, the invoice date should be the first of the month to the last of the month, and then review the accounting date to make sure the dates listed on the accounting sheet match that invoice date. Accounting sheets should always be submitted in Excel. Feel free to write notes in the margin if explanation is needed. Always show work and use formulas in that Excel sheet. Templates for the accounting sheet are available. If you're revising your budget, please wait to submit the invoice until after the budget revision has been completed. CVRC staff will check all line items against the budget. We will review documentation, and we will make sure that all of these things align. For example, agencies should make sure there is enough in the available balance of the budget so that the expenditure will not cause the line item to go into the negative. Also, we will look at the supporting time and activity reports. We will match the pay rate, the approved hours that staff are able to work, and that all of those documents and numbers match. If you need to submit a budget revision, those can be requested through web grants. And we will look at that as we walk through web grants in just a moment. If you have questions when working on an invoice or considering a budget revision, please do not hesitate to contact the CVRC Grants Department. We are always here to help. So we will look at web grants. We will log in with our tester account. We will select grants. And then here is our federal fiscal year 24 continuation award. You can see the grant components. The second one is invoices. This is where invoices will be submitted. We will add a claim. Again, it's always reimbursement. The reporting period, again, should be the first of the month through the last day of the month. And then we will save that. The first form is the web grants reimbursement form. We will edit this, and this is where you will enter the amounts for each budget line. So for personnel, we spent $100. For benefits, we spent $10. And then we spent $75 for operation costs. We will then save this form. Again, each of these line item totals should match the accounting sheet. Once I have completed that, I will mark that as complete. And then go on to invoice supporting documentation. This is where the agency may attach any required documentation or supporting documentation. You would add a new attachment, select your file, include a description, and then save the file. And the final section is the accounting sheet. You can see this is required. Again, the accounting sheet should be submitted in an Excel format. Ensure that all the dates on the accounting sheet are correct. Once you've uploaded everything, you can mark it as complete. These would all be marked as complete, and then my submit button would be available here. I have not submitted my accounting sheet, so at this time, the system will not allow me to submit. If I go back to my grant, There is also a section here called contract amendments. This is where budget revisions will be submitted. There are 3 parts to a budget revision. So I will add my amendment. Again, it's a budget revision. I will give it a title and save this. And then go to the budget revision request. So the first part of the budget revision is this requested budget amendment grid. So I can edit the grid. This is a high-level roll-up of what my requested budget amendment is. So if I previously had $1,000 in personnel, and now I want to make it $1,100 because I had $500 in benefits, but I'm reducing that to $400. And then there are no changes to the rest of my budget. So these are all staying the same. And I'm just putting numbers in here. I don't remember what my budget was that we just looked at. The second section of the budget revision is this narrative. This is your justification for the request. Please provide a brief explanation of what the requested changes include and a justification for those. And then the last section will be documentation. This form does require you to submit or to add a document to this form. This can be the budget revision worksheet, which again is available as a download on our website, a spreadsheet that the agency has created, or a Word document. More information is better when a budget revision is being requested. And I don't have a document to attach, but this is where that would be attached. And once this is done, I will save the form. And again, for each of the 3 parts, it will ask me to mark it as complete. It will not let me to mark this one as complete because I have not attached the required document. But once you, there's the error message, but once you mark it as complete, again, you will then get the submit button, and then you can submit that budget revision. Let's go back to our grant. While we are in web grants, here is this signed grant contract. If you have not already, this is where you would upload your signed contract. Click on this first link, signed grant contract. You can see it's required. And again, you would select your file, give it a name, and save the file. If you have any questions as you're working in web grants, please feel free to contact anyone in the grants department, and they can provide you technical assistance. Next, we will talk about contracts and consultants. So if you have a contractual consultant, it is a requirement that you have contracts that have a minimum of the following requirements: the hourly rate for the contractor, the number of hours that person will work, and a description of services. The contract should also have a beginning and an ending date and should be signed by both parties. If there is an approved contractual consultant in your budget, make sure to submit a copy of the contract prior to the execution to our office. It should have been included in the application, but if it was not, it should be included as a correspondence in the web grant system. Make sure that that contract employee is aware of and adheres to all federal guidelines. Programs and projects that receive funding from our office must meaningfully collaborate with other systemic partners in the community that provide services to victims of crime. This may include law enforcement, judiciary, prosecutors, and other victim service providers. It is important to work at building these collaborative relationships to leverage the funds, but also to leverage resources that are available to victims. Now we're going to briefly go through some of the civil rights compliances for subrecipients. This is one of the contractual requirements. If you receive federal funding, you do have civil rights obligations. Some of these obligations are Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Safe Streets Act, the Victims of Crime Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination Act, Title IX, and the various DOJ regulations on the equal treatment for faith-based organizations. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act states that no person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, national origin, shall be excluded from participation and denied the benefits in or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal funding. Under the Victims of Crime Act, no person on the grounds of race, color, religion, national origin, disability, or sex may be discriminated against or denied access. Under this federal funding, no one on the basis of actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, or disability shall be excluded from receiving services from the agency. Title 504 talks about an individual who is disabled with a physical or mental disability that substantially limits one or more life activities, has a record of impairment, or is regarded as having an impairment. These individuals are protected. Under the Rehabilitation Act, it also talks about the number of employees receiving funding and how much funding you would have to receive in order to have a compliance coordinator. The ADA Act talks about individuals with physical and mental impairments, including the deaf and hard of hearing community, who are also protected under the limited English proficiency requirements. Again, the agency is required to have an accessibility policy and a limited English proficiency policy, which includes how staff are trained to work with these individuals. The Age Discrimination Act protects individuals from being denied services based upon age. The Educational Amendment of 1972 is about participation being denied for an educational program. And the Equal Treatment of Faith-Based Organization talks about prohibiting discrimination against organizations on the basis of religion, and they define religion as any religious practice as well as belief, including severely held moral or ethical benefits. It is important that the agency is aware of these civil rights laws and regulations. The protected classes under all of these acts are the protected classes that include race, color, national origin, religion, gender, disability, and age. Additionally, sexual orientation and gender identity are protected. As a CVRC funded recipient, you must provide reasonable accommodations for disabilities in addition to ensuring reasonable access to individuals regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, and gender. CVRC is required to monitor the organization's civil rights compliance. Again, we will ask about your policies and procedures, such as who do you report civil rights violations to? How do you train staff and volunteers on civil rights? How do you inform clients about filing a grievance? For example, if you receive a complaint, you must forward it to the EEOC and the Office of Civil Rights, as well as CVRC. CVRC has clear policies and procedures that explain how an individual can complain directly to our office, how we will refer the complaint, and how we will acknowledge and train on the requirements related to the complaint. CVRC also has a 501 coordinator in our office to ensure programs meet the OCR requirements. We have grievance policies, limited English proficiency policies, statements that our programs are aware of these various civil rights compliance policies, and these assurances that are in our contracts with all of our programs. One of the grant requirements is to download CVRC's civil rights policies from the Documents to Download section on our website. You can find the link to the website in the description of this video. It is also required that the agency disseminate these policies appropriately throughout the organization and that the authorized official email CVRC to say that they have received these policies. This will also be included in the survey. So again, before we close this video, a reminder to complete the survey using the link in the description to document your attendance. This is a requirement of the grant. Our contact information is listed on this slide. You can reach the grants department at the general email, or you can contact me directly as the VOCA grant administrator. Again, please remember to complete the survey as your record of attendance. Also, be sure that all staff have completed the OVC TTAC training. This training consists of 4 modules listed on this slide. And lastly, agencies are required to have an annual audit. If the most recent audit was not included in your application, be sure that the agency uploads the audit upon completion to the correspondence section in Web Grants. Thank you for attending this workshop. The CVRC Grants Department is available to answer any questions that you have. Please know that we are here to help the agencies be successful in implementing the award, so do not hesitate to reach out for assistance or to ask any questions. We thank all of you for the important work that you do to support New Mexico's victims of crime, and we wish you a successful fiscal year 2024.